Okay, this is episode 14 of Esports Salon, my industry talk show, panel show, discussion show. I'm the usual host, Thorin. This show is sponsored by Esports Pools, which actually just means I'm sponsored by Esports Pools. It almost sounds disingenuous to imply that in any way Esports Pools is paying for something like these guys to fly out or some sort of appearance fee or something. They do it all from the kindness of their hearts. And also because esports is an industry run on extreme nepotism and power politics, and I will destroy all of these individuals' careers, publicly and privately, if they do not appear on this show. That's actually how all my content works. I am a tyrant who rules the scene with an iron grip of death, and you do not want to be first against the wall when I come along. So, in light of that, the willing participants to the show are as follows. So, in the top right-hand corner, I've got my man Sideshow Gaming, who, you know, interestingly enough, one of the things I think is funny about you, Sideshow, is that every time I've seen you on any video footage, you look exactly like what you are. A normal-looking bloke from the northeast of England who's grinded, made his way up through esports, got some good knowledge, working on sort of your appearance skills, as in how you seem on camera presence, polish, etc. But every time one of your friends links to or posts a photo of you, you look like Tony Blair 10 years from now, undergoing some sort of debilitating illness. Why is that?
I assume that is just simply the difference between looking at me dead on, where you can't see anything else, and how I normally act and walk around, and my posture and things.
It is mad though, the pictures they get of you, mate, they're unreal, aren't they?
There are some things that should never be shown. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously Sideshow, well known for writing for Over.gg, comes from the Team Fortress 2 community, has done lots and lots of different content in esports, for Overwatch specifically, and lots of things haven't been announced publicly, but you will see more of him going forwards in 2018. This is the way esports works. Right, keep moving around the chat. In the bottom right-hand corner, I've got someone who is just a picture at the moment, not even a photo, an artist's rendition. Perhaps he committed a crime and now we are searching for this individual. Some sort of grisly double murder-suicide pact. I don't know what it would be. But his name is RadoN. I've actually just realised I've done the overlay. Don't worry, that'll be fixed in the edit. His name is RadoN. His Twitter handle is RadoN on fire. Now, I naively thought he was just trying to cash in on the hype of CSGO being big, because obviously we've got Room on Fire there, and if you have on fire, it implies you're in that casting crew. First of all, he's not in that casting crew. Don't be ridiculous. Secondly, apparently he didn't even name it for that. He actually named it as an homage. That's like the French way of like sort of being classy about the fact you just copied from him. He did it as an homage to the great esports narrative chronicler Theon, also known as Faker's publicist, Loki. Now, I don't know whether that's some sort of a sign of what sort of route RadoN plans on going, if perhaps we're going to have 50 articles about Flower and about how he's a genius and maybe the first big kill he got in a game or something. I don't know what might obsess him, but I'm interested to see how it unfolds, because I know actually RadoN as before Overwatch, we had all the other big esports games, he was one of those people who would often be commenting. He'd often do it. By the way, he's an unsung hero because he would actually post people's content to Reddit without them asking, which is that mad sort of like scenario that we're all expected to be in as content creators. Like, I'm putting this content out in the world, but I do not want anyone to post, please. But oh yes, they're posting it. Nice. And if they don't post it, you just go on there. Why does bloody content not get appreciated nowadays? So he is one of those unsung heroes who made this entire ludicrous premise of how Reddit should work and self-promotion actually vaguely function. So on the one hand, I can't tell whether you are a true hero or whether you are actually propping up the machine that rolls over and destroys all of us. So you'll have to decide that for yourself, right? Also, journalists now, been writing for EsportsHeaven. Anywhere else you write for?
Also Invent Global.
Invent Global, yes.
Lab.
And where was the third one?
Winston's Lab.
Winston's Lab, yes.
Yep.
Obviously our favourite. Now, the last person for this chat is Yiska. Now, Yiska also, like RadoN, he's rising up through the scene. He hasn't quite gotten to the Sideshow level yet. No one cares about his photos or memes about them, or even draws parallels between politicians that probably started pointless wars that caused blood and loss of many lives, all over their own hubris, ego, and perhaps a globalist agenda. So here's the question, Yiska. you also write for EsportsHeaven, right?
No, not only for Winston's Lab.
Only for Winston's Lab, right? Okay. The problem is there's a lot of people in Overwatch at the moment writing for EsportsHeaven. So somehow I assume they have sort of like tapped the main vein. By the way, that's a purely, no, that's not a pun, Sideshow. That wasn't some sort of innuendo. I meant legitimately like an actual miner tapping main vein. That sounds even worse. What have I done? Right, anyway. So you know when people used to dig in the earth, they were looking for stuff. And when they would get to it, they'd go, this is like a vein, this amount of stuff. And they would tap it a lot more. In fact, even the tap part sounds bad now. Why do innuendos work that way? Why do they work when we don't want them to work? Unlike miners, actually, ironically. If you know anything about the mining crisis in the Northeast, shout out to the now done miners. Also, funnily enough, by a politician who, again, pushed their own agendas at the cost of the working class people. Straight fire reference. Not many people are going to get it. Right. This episode, as you've probably guessed by the crew of people I've surrounded myself with, is going to be exactly what I decry on Twitter, which is where people who are rookie journalists talk about the problems in the scene, how shit the scene is, and how it needs to improve. The difference is these people actually are going to do it within a framework that is reasonable, not just for the sake of complaining, because we're obviously going to be talking, as you might have seen by the people we've got in the chat, about Overwatch and journalism in Overwatch. And I feel like compared to every other game I've had any involvement with as a journalist, Overwatch feels like the hardest to have the same level of success in. So let's start at the first place. So Sideshow, you were there from the very beginning of Overwatch in this sense. Just getting hits for articles, just getting some level of tangible success has been fairly hard throughout the whole time, right?
Yeah, it has, and it almost went backwards in terms of like how esports content has largely been consumed, because it went back to large sites and people would visit. Gosu Gamers was the first one because they ran all the tournaments at the beginning, the weekly tournaments, and they had the rankings there that the pro players actually cared about because there was no other way of telling who the good teams were. So they would sell the Gosu Gamer rankings to sponsors and stuff. It's like, look, we're the top 10 team in the world. So that meant that Gosu Gamers got a lot of traffic. And so if you wrote for those guys, your articles would get a reasonable amount of hits as well. But basically, if you were anywhere else or you tried to publish it on your own and promote it through Reddit and stuff, there was no chance that it was getting pretty much any views. So it really went backwards in a sense. It was very strange.
Yes, and obviously, I mean, one of the key factors behind that is that every other esports game funnily enough, okay, Counter-Strike's a great example because Counter-Strike itself moved away from the big sites. Like HLTV.org still exists as a big site, but first of all, some people find out the news when that site stuff is posted on Reddit, and so everything has been subsumed, assimilated into the Reddit machine, where because it's a content aggregator, and say what you will about it, it does serve that purpose generally. We all use it because it saves time, it gets the stuff that's relevant up there, you don't have to search through all these big sites. The difference is, when League of Legends came along, Reddit already existed, so in League of Legends, you actually never got the big sites. What you got is, there might be sites that you know now for writing about League of Legends, but you actually know about them through coming through a content aggregator like Reddit. And also, a key factor to add in here is, you have to get to a really high level on Twitter before that becomes even vaguely relevant in terms of directly getting you viewers. So, mainly, it's still going to be Reddit for the majority of people. So then, when we come to Overwatch, the big problem here is, I think in a world in which there hadn't been this split between competitive Overwatch, I won't say that it would have been like League of Legends, because I noticed there was a real problem where, yes, clips of highlights did dominate the front page in a way that they don't in League of Legends, but the split did mean that Reddit seems like it isn't as great a source, whereas, for example, in League of Legends, even 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and to this day, if I post something there, the chances for success on the article are massively more. Even when the sub was a similar size, bizarrely, because the sort of people who you want reading your article sometimes are casual people. Like, you know, if you think about the sort of complaint you'll often get on an article you write that you try to be insightful about, the comments are all the people who've picked the one thing they think you were wrong on, you know, or that you were not on base on. Well, there's the casual guy. He'd love the fact that you gave an overview of some team and gave some little detail. But unfortunately, that guy isn't on competitive Overwatch. So let's start in this area here. So, Yiska, obviously, it's pointless to, as I said there, you can't just act like, first of all, if you'd kept r/Overwatch and had no competitive Overwatch, like it necessarily would be better. I can't know that, you know. It seems like there's not really a control group because it does seem like the users there behave differently. Now, admittedly, because they actually moderate it differently, like I know in most subs, they would actually limit the number of highlights, or they'd put like sort of a low effort threshold, you know, where it'd have to be a very crazy highlight maybe. So has Reddit made it more challenging, or what are the challenges rather in a split Reddit world in Overwatch of getting success for articles and getting them out there and getting exposure?
It's actually quite funny because I remember I got into beta fairly early and wanted to start writing about it, and it was all still on our Overwatch, right? So I used to post articles there, or really just maybe long text posts or whatever, and they would get way more traffic than I even get nowadays on competitive Overwatch or ever did on competitive Overwatch. So I think like you could get like 20,000 views on a written piece on our Overwatch fairly early in the scene. I think it was like.
When you say that, though, give us like a reference point. Like, is the logic there that even on like the second page, for example, of Arsenal Overwatch, it'd still get a lot of views as opposed to, it'd have to probably, even if it tops out competitive Overwatch, it's probably not massive, right? Well, can you give us like some vague idea of the range?
I mean, nowadays, if you can't get it onto front page competitive Overwatch, it doesn't matter. And second page on our Overwatch barely matters, but it used to matter a lot when the scenes weren't as divided, and also just there was not as much content being created because it was sort of limited by people having beta access, right? So I think somewhere along the lines, the mods made a decision, I would have to say, and went with one crowd. And I mean, I know that there was the big debate also with the petition and everything. I think in hindsight, it's sort of unfortunate that it happens that way. But nowadays, because I'm not really, I actually quit Reddit cold in like this year. I can't take any more, mate. Like, for me, there was a lot more quality control on competitive Overwatch, which made it more appealing for me. But as a content creator, I would fucking love getting our Overwatch hits all the time. Like, and I actually tried to approach the mods about this and to talk with them. They seem fairly reasonable up to a point, but they created a community on certain metrics or certain ways or values that they now don't want to break. And I'm not sure, maybe Blizzard needs to strong arm themselves into that community and like suggest maybe, with like press passes for BlizzCon or something, that there might be some change in that regard. I'm not sure what you could do at this point.
Okay.
I feel like I have a slightly controversial view on this because I don't think that it was really anything that the moderators did at all in terms of separating or dividing the community or setting up our Overwatch to be more to do with memes or highlights or whatever. Because I came from the TF2 background where I think the proportion was fairly similar. Like when you look at the our Overwatch subreddit, it went massive instantly. I mean, it attracted almost all the casual players, it seemed. Obviously it didn't, but it attracted a huge proportion of them and overtook, what did it overtake? It overtook CSGO and then overtook League of Legends, and this was all within the first, certainly within the first year. I think it was within the first 8 months or something like that, and now it's on over 1 million subscribers. And competitive Overwatch is on 125, 128k, something like that. And so the difference between them is so massive. And this was something that I'd seen already in the way that the TF2 subreddit worked, was because there was such an overwhelming proportion of people who weren't involved or didn't care that much about the esports section of it, that the kind of topics that the majority of people enjoyed, and therefore the kind of topics that the majority of people upvoted and that rose to the top, were just incredibly casual stuff, and it drowned out whatever the esports content was. So they were forced to go and make a separate subreddit just to be able to get anywhere with it. And I think that is less to do with how the moderators were planning it, and more to do with just the crowd that went to Reddit for Overwatch. They were very casual. It was it was a different demographic. It was released on console. It was released on a PC to a huge range of guys that appeal to like the lore and the fan art and all of this kind of stuff. This is the community that uses. For starters, this is the community that plays the majority of Overwatch, right? This is the majority of the players of Overwatch, I think. Yes. And therefore, they all went to Reddit as well and just kind of drowned out the esports. It's still very niche, right? Esports, yes. Overwatch.
Well, just actually fun. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So just as a side point, one thing that also definitely happened, it should have been 2016 in the main subreddit, was that if you started or if you posted esports content, then there was a wretched crowd of Knights of New that would actively downvote. Like I messaged Reddit admins seeing if they had downvote bots set to the esports flare at some point, right? Like the mods were saying, yeah, we're not seeing any unusual behavior in that regard. Every single one was like 0%. I mean, they have limited metrics to measure this, but like it seemed impossible to sort of attract people to that, and especially because they were such active users, and everyone that has tried to promote their content on Reddit knows how important like the first hour is of ups and downvotes. And these people were refreshing their minds out, or were bots, 100%.
Okay, right, RadoN, we haven't got you in here yet, so you want to jump in on this topic?
One thing I think is positive from having competitive Overwatch on a separate subreddit is that it's fairly small subreddit. So when you post something, even if you're not no content creator, people get the chance to see it in the new, because it doesn't get refreshed constantly with new stuff. For example, highlights and something like that.
Yes. Well, that is one thing I will say. The fact that it is this, in theory, entirely curated esports subreddit, right? My biggest problem with it was when it first started, because it was a fucking joke when it had like 10,000, 20,000 subs. That is just, there's almost no point as a content creator even paying any attention. I will say now, I'm quite impressed by how many subs it has now as like a sort of fraction of Overwatch, because it's already gotten to a pretty good level in terms of where other esports games are at. So I will say, hopefully in the future, this will take care of itself. And as Overwatch gets bigger as an esport, you would hope that eventually one day, I mean, the only thing at that point that we can kind of complain about is like, it would have been bigger if it was the R of, that's about it. You know, as long as it levels out like that, I won't mind. But I will say, I actually think you're onto something there, Sideshow, because when I think of the crowd, even just anecdotally, that I remember getting super hyped when Overwatch was coming out, it actually wasn't my friends who played esports games. Most of them, funnily enough, actually came along afterwards when the hype had built, and they were like, oh, I've heard it's a fun game, so I'll play it as my casual game, you know. It was actually all the people who are more just the general gamers. You know, the sort of person who, they don't follow esports, but they played Doom just because it was a big new PC game, so they played that game. And so actually, that was always my theory as to why the sub had gotten big, actually, because there's a lot of people, especially people who work in the tech industry, obviously, who have office jobs, who use Reddit religiously. And what they do is they subscribe to all the things they're into. So for me, what happened is those people just added /Overwatch like they added politics or, you know, I don't know, rap music or whatever it is that they follow. And that's how you got that community. And hence it wasn't people coming in who, like, you know, at least in something like League of Legends, even if you play the game, like, there's so many millions play League of Legends that if you look at the size of the sub, they've actually never converted that many people. You have to at least have a passing interest in sort of the competitive side before you're probably going to sign up. Even if you sign up and you're not actually interested in the esports side of League of Legends, odds are you want to get better at the game and climb the ladder. That's usually why you might go there for guides or something, you know. It's not really people signing up to just be like, show me the craziest Zed outplay. Like, there's not really that much of that actually in League. So I kind of agree. I don't think it's as simple as being like, somehow our Overwatch could have been the other games. Maybe it is a different game in that respect. Yeah. But how can we tie this in then? What about in that case, when you do esports content, is there a different crowd or are there less people? I mean, obviously Overwatch as an esport hasn't done as great a job of converting its players into viewers. So has it been a bit more niche of an actual audience for your work, Sideshow?
I think it's difficult to tell as well, because both of them have positive feedback loops. So because you have our Overwatch and then a separate competitive Overwatch, and our Overwatch attracts the crowds that enjoy stuff like the fan art and the highlights and stuff like that. And so people, if they go onto that Reddit and they see content that they like, are going to sign up. And so it has a positive feedback loop in that sense. And you get the same thing for competitive Overwatch. I mean, if they were blended together and you had the 128,000 people from competitive Overwatch in the Overwatch subreddit and they used it all the time, and maybe you get a blend of more kind of casual people as well viewing the content. At the moment, I just feel like it's the same as most esports content. I very rarely get people viewing it that haven't heard of the teams at all, or I mean, obviously we only get a section of whoever bothers to comment. You don't know who's watching your videos or reading them that never says anything. But the people who bother to comment normally know what they're talking about, or have followed the teams, or add little snippets of information. They're rarely like, oh, thanks, I'm brand new to Overwatch, or just coming into the scene. Perhaps they will be at the start of Overwatch League, because that's where Blizzard are really trying to recapture the more casual audience and draw them back into esports. Because if you remember, if you go back to those first tournaments, they actually had mad viewership for the first couple of tournaments that ran in Overwatch because there was so much hype and it was in beta. Yes. So the only way of really being able to see what the game was like being played in a team v team setting was to tune into a tournament that happened to be running at the time, or tune into some guy's stream that when they were playing scrims, like how Seagull got so massive. So there was real furore about the game at the beginning, even in an esports kind of sense, because people wanted to see team v team, but then it all died down, and only now is it really starting to be rebooted, I think.
Okay. Right. By the way, on any of these topics, anyone who wants to jump in can jump in. I only start out telling people a specific thing to get them involved and kind of break the ice, etc. One thing I will say about Overwatch that I found a bit interesting, though, is, right, this is going to sound very critical, but it's actually more just contextual to some of the things we've just described about the way the community is split and then the sorts of people who are going to comment. Right, a downside of the game, unfortunately, with r/competitive Overwatch, because we're all here creating content, obviously that's what we're going to focus on in this discussion, is it does seem like there is a lot of negativity and criticism in the comments, and sometimes it's not like they're doing that in response to, like, you know, a very controversial video or opinion piece, just to like simple analysis content. And my theory on that is, when I've been in other games, right, first of all, obviously people who comment are, by the strictest definition, a very, very small minority of the people consuming the content, because most people just consume content. If they like it, they just move on with their life. They go, great, I enjoyed that, keep going on with my life. You know, the people who comment typically are going to have something motivating them, such as this was bullshit, or I want to argue about something, or I don't like the person who made the content. You know, it's understandable. But even so, one thing I actually, believe it or not, have always appreciated about the League of Legends community is that in every game you have those people who complain or they just argue, and somehow the way they argue isn't like, I disagree with this, it's like this content shouldn't exist, and as a result they become something of a negative force against the content's potential success. And the difference is, I actually have always said this, League of Legends, because it was a bigger game than Counter-Strike, had more of those people just by pure demographics. But because League of Legends also had a lot more people, it didn't seem as bad, because they were sort of drowned out by the people who did just say, oh, cool piece, like, I like this or whatever. And so the ratio was that much better that at least psychologically as a content creator, it felt a lot more welcoming, you know. You at least felt like you'd tapped into something. Whereas in competitive Overwatch, I feel like the only people who comment seem like the super hardcore fans. I mean, what are your experiences? You guys obviously have a different sense to me. You're on there much more than I am.
Yeah, for me, I would say that for starters, it seems to be a fairly large proportion of the comparatively of competitive Overwatch seems to comment. So like you see the mega threads and stuff with huge amounts of comments based on the, like, compared to the amount of subscribers and people watching the games, really. A lot of engagement seems to happen. And I think this is because there is a sense of a real bonded community that has stuck through the game, even though there's been no Overwatch League going on, and they've watched all of these small tournaments, and they feel in some sense like they are experts of the game as well, just because they've watched so much content. And I think this also feeds back into the critical responses for pieces and stuff, because frequently if you either forget or don't add a piece of information because you feel that it's not necessary or would be just extraneous, they'll add it and show that they know what they're talking about.
Yes,
there seems to be a sense of like they are the gatekeepers of Overwatch.
Who's allowed to be an expert, right?
Yeah. But I think this is also because Overwatch was such a new game and it didn't draw from any previous panel of experts. Anyone who was trying to break into the game and say, I'm an authority or I'm an analyst, there were also a huge amount of viewers who probably watched just as many games as you had, because there's no replay system or anything.
Sure.
So unless you had some pillar or you've been creating content for ages or have made some kind of name for yourself or were providing analysis that other people respected, then you were almost on the same level as everybody else who was just writing comments. So I think that kind of bred this atmosphere of people being more critical of the content creators.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, most of the time you actually, like, if you write for views, it's my, like, the best approach I've seen, or what people should be doing, is just engage with influences, and that is mainly players in the scene. If you can transport some opinion that a player holds, that will absolutely get way more stuff than what you could come up with, simply because, and I think what is happening here too, because I teach, and it feels like from my experience, it feels like the community is a lot younger, and they still are or think very much from authority, right? So they've only ever encountered like solid opinions from their teachers probably, or from their parents. They have not yet, second guessed as much these modes.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, in League of Legends, I assume that the audience has now grown with the game because it has been out for such a long time. So maybe there's a better mode of critical thinking, because also the listening and reading comprehension is flat garbage on some of these comments we're getting. Like like nobody's actually engaging with your argument, and like the comments we got when we started putting out like video content was like, this like their content can't be of value because they're not supported by Monty or Reinforce or something, right? That's you're like, you need to grind super hard in order to make a name for yourself. And even if you're like someone like Volamel that basically has bangers every single day on the front page, nobody knows your name, right?
Yeah, that's the part that's a bit puzzling to me, actually, because I agree, in the early days of other games I've been involved in, yes, unless you already are like ancient like me and you were established in some context, in every game people go through this process. It's basically like kind of getting vetted by the community, overcoming that, building your credibility, and gradually you can kind of win some of these people over. And, sometimes, funnily enough, this is another interesting factor, is that sometimes the sort of person who'll be like, I used to really dislike this stuff, but I kind of like it now. It's like, you do realize you're not actually saying anything about me there. What you're really describing inadvertently is your own experience of becoming sort of acclimatized to the stuff I do. Like, I didn't take your comments from 2 years earlier that I didn't see and like build my whole life along a train track where you're liking it now, and likewise, you're in a scenario where when people make a lot of these comments, it does feel like, I mean, I kind of agree in terms of like the reading comprehension thing. Sometimes people just want to argue, understandably, and they're not really arguing against you. They just want to argue about something, and they take your comment and crowbar it into what they were going to say anyway. But I am actually shocked in Overwatch. I feel like the biggest area that's still lacking is, like you're saying, people like Volamel, people like, I mean, admittedly he works for a team now, so he's not doing it as much, but people like Harsha, who really were grinding super hard. Like they were putting out so many videos, so many articles, and they've made it clear that they're super passionate about the game. Actually, both of them, I think, pretty much took attack generally from the beginning, maybe because of who they are personality-wise, that they didn't try to be very controversial. They tried to just sort of be like, here are my opinions, make of them what you will. It's not like they've ever been kind of like the difference is when I put out opinion pieces, I also sort of fuck with people who think otherwise and be like, you fucking idiot. I've never seen these people do it, but they got the response as though they'd done that. That's what was bizarre to me. Like, the amount of times I've been on the competitive Overwatch sub and I'll see someone just make a comment like, oh, fucking Harsh is such an arrogant bastard who thinks that. I'll go, are you even talking about the same guy? Where have you got that from? Where is this coming from? It's about as harmless as you can get, right?
It's also super funny because to me it feels like unless you express your opinions with certitude, so you're very sure of that, which you can't be in a game as early as Overwatch is. You also don't have all the input and everything. It's not like we have solid rules of like 15 years of CS, right? So we're still figuring out these modes of things. And actually the comment that literally triggered me off Reddit was actually a response to
drum roll.
Response to an Oversight episode with Volamel, where someone was like, Volamel has made zero definitive statements other than Flutter will be a good player. What is he doing on that show? Like, completely disregarding that you can't have certainty at the moment, and at the same time, you also like you're asking to be straight lied to your face at this point. Right.
Also, he did literally say that Flutter was like the best player in the world. Like, that's about probably the most bold statement that anyone made in the whole fucking show. Like, so you damned if you do and damned if you don't, I guess, Volamel. Then again, I will say this, Volamel. Listen, I used to be like you, if you ever go and look up some old pictures of me, I had massive afro type hair. I had outrageous clothes that were terrible fashion. I also thought, like some sort of like, old fucking stoic from the Greek times. All that matters is the mind. That should be a palace of knowledge and thinking, it doesn't matter the external appearance, these ethereal things. But you know what? I did notice my career really took off a lot more when I sort of like wore a suit and where I actually shaved, and I like sort of like looked like I was someone who wasn't homeless, who'd just been given shelter in a fucking bed sit for the night and a laptop to make stuff. Just all I'm saying is, the guy in that Twitter picture, look like him. He looks clean cut. He looks like the sort of guy that if your daughter came around and said, "Hey, here's Billy, my new boyfriend," you go, "Oh, he seems like a very nice young man." Not, "Who the fuck is this?" And then he goes, "Oh, but some brilliant stuff about Overwatch." You go, "This guy's crazy. Get him out of my house now." So just a little sidebar, a little tip for the young ones out there for volleyball, maybe if he's watching. He obviously is. Right, RadoN, get in on this topic then, because here's the thing. In theory, you've just gone above the rags stages of the rags to riches story. You haven't really completed anything more than that, but you're just above rags. So do people just wreck you in the comments? Do you get reasonable feedback? What's your experience been like?
It depends on the pieces, but most of the time when I have something like analysis, people usually wreck me. And I've noticed, the thing is that people are kind of ready to go to war basically over their opinion. They're not willing to even read into my argument when something is that they really disagree with.
Okay, is that discouraging? Does it affect you? Do you still keep doing it anyway? What's your relationship been like with content in that sense?
Well, it depends on the day, basically. Most of the time, I try to understand what their argument is, but if it's something that I really think isn't the case, I try to reach out to other content creators, perhaps, if they can help me out and see if the person is reasonable, or if they just are looking to argue with me.
Okay. I'm glad you've never reached out to me asking me about that. I would just be like that fucking emperor in the previous, like, wipe them out, all of them. Like, I wouldn't have any quarter whatsoever, but yeah, keep going.
One of the things I like about the competitive Overwatch community is that they look to engage into discussions, and not only about the things they disagree, but for example, if I have an interview and player says something they find interesting, you'll find 10, 20 comments about a single quote. And that's really interesting. People basically don't just read and skip.
That's good, actually, in itself. I have to say, in general, on a lot of other subs, you only get the negative comments, or you get sort of the, like, good job, and then they're out, like, there's very little actual discussion of the ideas, In fact, I can, by the way, I can totally say this now and sort of, like, pull back the curtain with the little Wizard of Oz type bloke working the machine, because the sort of people who comment really negatively about this stuff, the whole point is they are obsessively mentally deranged. So they won't be stopping just because I tell them that they're actually helping me. But by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, when you comment loads and loads on a thread, the upvote ratio now matters less because the engagement also somehow drives it up. Like, if you ever look at this, you can just go ahead and look at any kind of drama thread. It does work. So one of my secrets to shortcutting the fact that I can't get everyone to like me because I was born with anti-charisma is that I've been able to make everyone that hates me need to obsessively and at massive length and detail explain why they hate me, thereby getting my own engagement, and I'm back in the game, boys. So what is it like? Are they quite positive in the community?
Well,
I wouldn't say that it's positive in the community, but what I would say is that the negative comments are often I find often fairly reasonable, or like the points that they point out occasionally are things that you will have missed. I did a video a while back, not a while back actually, a week ago, on Luxury Watch Blue, and I mentioned a player, Freeze, and I had forgotten actually that Freeze changed his name and became Zephyr, and because of that whole business with Giguri and the hacking scandal back then, and all of this drama that happened in the Korean scene, Freeze changed his name to Zephyr, which would have been like a nice little snippet to add in. And that wasn't something that I left out because I thought it was just unnecessary. It was just that I had forgotten that it happened. And so I got a comment, or maybe even a couple of comments about that. I mean, we did a podcast show a while back as well, and there was a section that just didn't work at all. And like somebody posted and they were like, "This didn't work. I thought this was straight trash," and then posted like a paragraph of why it was straight trash. And I was like, Yes, I definitely agree with you. Like, that segment didn't work. Perhaps you could be more compassionate in the sense that we're constantly trying to come up with bits or whatever for the podcast.
I didn't like this section, but I wouldn't describe it as straight trash. Please try again next time.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, there's got to be some pieces that fall flat on the face because you're doing live podcasts over the course of 1 or 2 hours, and you're trying to throw jokes in every now and then. So there are going to be bits that fall flat. But again, that wasn't an issue with the criticism at all. That was completely fair. So I often find stuff like this, but I think I'm also fairly good at just disregarding comments that I think make no sense. So I tend to focus more on the ones that actually resonate with me. In some sense, when I look at the comment thread, if it's more a process of self-reflection in some sense, because I'm only paying attention to the negative comments that I somewhat agree with. So it just highlights them.
Okay.
I have to say though, your experience from just reading the threads of your content is also very different than those, especially writers that didn't have a video presence, and you also have positive charisma. Everyone wants you involved in all these Overwatch League productions. So in order for someone to be very negative with their feedback, they now have to put skin in the game and have to say, okay, if I express this negative opinion of them, I'm going to get downvoted, and apparently that matters somehow, which I still don't understand why. But like that's a very different experience than just thrashing some nameless, faceless writer that you've never encountered, right?
Okay. Well, let me ask you a very, very raw question then. And Sideshow, you can definitely add to this yourself, because obviously before whatever you might be doing video-wise, you were in a position where you yourself were trying to support yourself through content in some sense.
Yep, living in a shed.
Absolutely. Do the problems in this sense with getting your pieces out there, because now we've restricted it to just competitive Overwatch. We're now talking about, can you succeed there? Clearly Reddit is still a big deal to get traffic, etc. Are these experiences, when you add up the plus and minus, are they discouraging? Because I know actually, like, one thing I'm still shocked about is when you consider the scope of Overwatch and the money that's in the game now and the potential that it has obviously to become a massive esport, it does have a pretty cool content creation scene. Like, I've noticed the 10 people I could list are doing a lot of shit, so I'm really impressed. But it does feel like a lot of it is just driven by passion alone. There's not that many people coming in. Like, put it this way, this is one of the things I always said about the Reddit scenario, right? I came into Overwatch very cynically. Same way I did in League of Legends, by the way, and I've admitted this from day one. I came into League of Legends because what happened was I was at an event doing some Counter-Strike interviews, and it just so happened that one of the players who was big in League of Legends at the time had been on the team that I worked for, SK Gaming, as a League of Legends player, and he was now on like one of the best teams in the world. So all I did was, I thought, you know what, I don't know much about League, but I definitely know how to do interviews. I know roughly, you know, from the news articles who the top teams are and stuff. I'll pull this guy aside, I'll do a little interview with him, I'll try and make up for the fact I don't know much about the game by making the questions more interesting, and like a skill of interviewing, for example, is sometimes you don't have to even know anything. You can tell by what they're telling you where to go in the interview. You know, there's more to mine, as it were, you know. So I just did this, and what happened was the interview got put on Reddit by someone. It did very, very well, and also at the time, League of Legends especially was way bigger as a subreddit than any other esports game. So I realized, holy fuck, not only did it do well, it actually did, like, you know, like say 5 times as well as any content I could do in a game I'm an expert about. So why don't I, yes, I'm never going to make this my only game, but why don't I, on the side, when the rest of my work's done, put a bit of shine to that game and, you know, try and work on it. And in fact, I'll even come from that angle. What I'll do is I'll be like, guys, I'm never going to be an expert. In fact, even to this day, I don't really kind of like, my head doesn't really get around League as much as the other games, you know? I thought, right, what I'll do is I'll specialize in the sort of content that isn't about being an expert. I'll do the other stuff where my skills elsewhere can actually be applied, and maybe they don't have many people like that, right? What I'm getting at here is, I don't see almost any other people like that in Overwatch. Like, I only came in Overwatch, obviously, because Monty switched over, and I was like, I'll give it my best shot. We'll see where this goes. I've done a couple of investigative pieces. That was nearly always just when a player in question reached out to me, like, I'm having these problems. You know, can you help me with this? That's the only real reason I did it, you know? There doesn't really seem to be a lot of the, like, professional journalists have moved over. So I wonder, from you guys, is it just passion pushing you forwards? RadoN, come on, we need to know about your passion, mate. I can tell it's burning up inside you.
I basically started following Overwatch because I think it was Overwatch Open. Was the first tournament I watched.
Yes,
I really liked the game, so that's how I started following it. And haven't really thought about exposure and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd say it's mostly about liking the game as an esport. I don't even play that much. I basically like watching competitive matches.
Okay.
I think what you will find when you analyze that group of 10 people is that they're almost exclusively only Overwatch writers. And that sort of suggests to me that that they only have an interest in Overwatch, or they're just very young content creators, so they couldn't have done anything else in their careers. What therefore makes it a little bit problematic is that there's always this aura of not being able to say certain things because you might just kill your career right there, right?
People who are afraid of the hive mind, basically.
Hive mind, or even, wrath from certain powerful people or organizations, right?
Yes, believe it or not, when players say things about you, even when factually untrue and provably untrue, that can actually cause people to side with players. I am familiar with that process, actually, in the Overwatch subreddit, But yeah, keep going. Sorry, just made it a bit personal there.
No, but I think that if we want to have more, broad journalism, then it's almost. At first, I always thought, okay, people that do more than one game, they can't achieve that depth, so that's not really appealing to me. But what I realized is that what they're simply doing is give themselves an out, so just to not, completely derail their life if something they said for that specific thing now closes so many doors that you can't, or at least let's say in a reasonable time frame, make anything work because of
I can actually tell you, just as a quick sidebar, just to corroborate what you're saying there, that is something I actively do myself. Like, for example, when I've been on one of my rants and I know a certain side of fan base in a game super pissed off, I'm not going to not do content or let that dictate, but I might think to myself, you know what, I think I'll push that content to next week, and this week, League of Legends it is then. Well, won't be posting anything about Brazilian CSGO teams for this week, and League of Legends it is. Sometimes I have to be cynical like that.
Yeah.
It might be a little... Oh, go on. No.
So just as a side point, then if one of these 10 content creators comes out with solid criticism, realize what that took out of them, and that point is probably super crisp because they now put themselves on the line, potentially harming their careers, and give it more of a thought through, and don't just assume that it's garbage because it's not consensus reality in that regard,
put it this way, okay, I'll just say, look, people don't have to believe me, obviously, but as someone with a lot of experience in esports and esports journalism, in other games, maybe people have tried this, but I am not aware of anyone in Overwatch who is doing clickbait, purposely controversial stuff, and by the way, is in any way getting money or hits. That sort of conspiracy theory, which will always be applied by people who don't know the industry, that's pure imaginary state. There's nothing grounded in reality. None of the 10 people we're referring to are Volamil isn't you know what, fuck these plebs, I'm just going to write about how actually Taimu is actually, he is toxic, and you know what, he's going to fail because he's a bad person. No one's doing those articles. So yeah, I'll definitely corroborate that. That's ridiculous.
For me, if we're discussing the concept of being driven by passion or something coming into the Overwatch scene, it might be a little bit surprising, but my move was almost completely cynical coming into Overwatch. I had just come from TF2 and had been following a career through university and stuff that I decided to move away from. And so was looking for something else to do. And with the huge influx of players moving over to Overwatch, I decided to move over and try and forge some kind of path in there, and decided to spread myself as wide as I possibly could with all the different content, just to maximize my chances of doing one of these things. So I just decided to write a bit of news. I wrote a bit of opinion, created some video content, tried to get into casting, was doing a bit of analysis and seeing if I could get into coaching. I was basically just trying to play my hand as wide as humanly possible to see if I could try and make a career out of it. And at the beginning, I didn't even, for the first a long period of months, I would say that the game did not grip me in any sense as well. And I was grinding through it, just watching the VODs, trying to figure out what happened. And then I would go back and I would just play TF2 instead. And that was my way of getting enjoyment out of it. And then the more that you watch and the more you get involved in the storylines and the players grab you. And now I enjoy it tons and play the game much more now than I ever did before as well. But right at the beginning, I did see it as an opportunity to do something that I had. So when I was doing it in TF2, I was looking at other content creators in CSGO and in League of Legends and Dota 2 and stuff. But the games were already so set, and they've been going on for so long, and it would be a new entry for me moving over into them. that it just seemed like a ridiculous kind of idea to try and forge that as a path. Whereas Overwatch was brand new, so you didn't really need any credentials to try and get into it. And I could leverage some of the kind of TF2 connections anyway. And theoretically, it should be a meritocracy if everyone starts at base 0. I felt relatively confident about being able to produce content in a variety of different ways. So I was going into it less with the passion and more with this could be a viable career choice, but the passion kind of ended up coming along now, and now I love doing it. So that was more the side that I was going from.
Because one thing that does concern me a little bit, like obviously we've mainly, because we're all people who do like either analysis or narrative stuff, stuff that's like supplementary. Obviously, it's definitely a concern if this sort of stuff can succeed and the sort of feedback it gets, and definitely how viable it is as a career. But another thing I'm kind of worried about, and I notice people don't seem to actually notice this because it's something that's missing, I think, actually, is there is very little actual investigative journalism in Overwatch. All that happens is the people who already are investigative journalists in the other games. So Jacob Wolf's obviously a very good example because all he does is investigative journalism. And then Richard does the odd piece when something comes his way. And by the way, in that scenario, I know people think Richard's like just hates Overwatch or something. No, he clearly is very skeptical of it with good reason. But more importantly, people, I think, only reach out to him with information on the game because they know that's kind of the way his bread's buttered. So he gets that sort of stuff. It's confirmation bias. Whereas, for example, those stories I told you earlier, in every other game, the reason why I don't do investigative stuff is it's not really like my cup of tea. It's not the thing I'm most interested in. So most things that come my way in other games, I myself pass to Richard. Like if a player comes to me, oh, in CSGO, my org didn't pay me, I'll tell him, listen, I'm not really that knowledgeable about that, mate. I'd take that to Richard. He'll vet it. If it's a good story, he'll do it, But in Overwatch, it just happened that these were a couple of people I knew, and they literally were like, you've got to help me. Like this is happening with my team, or this is happening with a teammate, or whoever it might be, and then I was like, right, I'll take it on myself. But the sad thing is, in that moment, I actually thought to myself, right, well, I know Richard's not super into Overwatch, right? Who can I pass this stuff? Yeah, there's no one. There's actually no one I can give the story. Like, there's only me. It's either me, I'm going to do it, or this story is dead. So the reason I worry about that is because that's when the community, like you're saying, there was no barrier to entry. Anyone could have gotten involved. But now you look, with the Overwatch League coming on, first of all, some Overwatch teams have hired away journalists, so there's not as many people necessarily in the scene itself. And then secondly, if it's just all going to go through the mainstream aspect of whoever is the big journalist for ESPN or for other big websites that exist, I worry that there's not going to be kind of the community journalists who are going to kind of give you like the community perspective, as it were. They're not going to kind of like have to align themselves with a big company or a big team. It does seem like there's an absence of those people. Do you have any theories why, or what could be behind this?
Well, okay. Just to add a thing in first, myself and Harsha used to do kind of little bits of investigative journalism stuff in terms of breaking roster moves, seeing who was being invited to OGN each season before it had been announced. Stuff like this. And actually, it was an incredible way of generating traffic as well, because if you manage to post some piece of investigative journalism that people care about, it's less like the actual incredibly useful hard-hitting stuff about problems within teams or stuff like that, but just the most surface level kind of stuff about being able to tell people what's going on and releasing Overwatch rosters and moves of players and stuff like this well before they happen, because orgs always take forever doing it, and by that time everyone knows anyway because it's just like a rumor, so it just gets silly, and they get massive traction on the subreddit because people love seeing that. I think the highest piece that I've ever got in terms of video or written content was when Siegel both joined and left NRG. I broke both of those pieces and they just got mad hits. They're up at like 20-30k views for those, along with other stuff about like the when NRG was offered an invite over to OG and Apex after Envious had declined it, and then Envious actually went ahead and accepted it. Harsha broke that story, but both of us, by accepting other positions, have completely stepped back from that. And we were doing minimal amounts ourselves, and there was nobody else, as far as I'm aware, doing it, and nobody seems to have filled the gap. It's not that difficult, and it has big rewards, so I'm really surprised actually that nobody does it.
I mean, the reason I see is just think of the person, what kind of a hero, literally hero, he would need to be in order to take on huge company backing with lawyers on payroll that that otherwise would twiddle their thumbs if you, or even very sue happy individuals in the scene that you can't touch, because what am I going to do as an independent content creator that does it for passion? Going to risk literally my life savings on reporting on a honestly fucked up thing that then will get me sued. And even if I'm right, like unless there's a big organization like an ESPN behind that could take care of that for you, why would you risk it? Like who would do that?
Well, funnily enough, this is why when people, I mean, obviously me and Richard are big examples of this, when people are very vitriolic in how they respond and they're like, oh, look, they're such assholes and they're so this, that, the other. It's like, who did you expect was going to be doing this sort of stuff? Do you think that the nicest guy in the world was going to sit down and go, I'm going to actually grind and I'm going to look into like private, I'm going to look into all the sort of like publicly sourced Danish government information on who owns a team. And I'm going to run up all these sources. And at the end, why am I going to do all this? Just to let some people know. No, you're going to let people do it because you don't like that someone has lied about it and that outrages you, or, you know, you're someone where, you know, you feel like something's been obscured and being told a different way and that pisses you off and triggers you. You actually have to be a bit nuts. Like actually, funnily enough, Richard had a line he once said to me where you actually need people where there's something a bit wrong with them and that's what drives them to do this sort of shit because no one else is going to toil through a lot of that stuff. For as you're saying, sometimes the best case scenario is people saying like begrudgingly like, well, it's sort of correct, but he's an asshole anyway. Like that's often the case. And sometimes you can be right and still have created enemies in the industry. Now a team won't work with you. Now a player's against you. It can cause you a lot of problems, even though, as Sideshow said, the carrot aspect of it is very appealing. You can definitely make a career. You can have massive hits off this. If, for example, like, here's the thing. People naively might think, well, you've just said why. If Jacob Wolf does it, why would I do it? Because here's the thing. If you break the story, when Jacob Wolf writes his story, he has to link to your story. You will now get hits from people on ESPN. It actually does work. There's a logic to it. But it does seem like there's not that many other people. I mean, I think you did hit something there, Sideshow, which is, I'll have to look up this principle because I know it's a famous thing people have heard of, but I can't remember the name of the principle. There's a principle in hierarchical office culture where they say that what happens is you always get promoted past any job that you're competent at to the one that you're not competent at. Because obviously what happens is you're so good at what you do, someone above goes, I want this guy on my team. He gets you promoted. And basically that principle continues to be played out until you get to the point you're not that good, then you just average at your job and you just get stuck at that job. And hence every company, no matter how many talented people they have, end up with a bunch of people doing a shit job. And so actually this has already happened. People like Harsha should be one of the #1 content creators going forward. He's not going to be though, because he can get a full salary working for a team, doing something else he's probably passionate about, but didn't get to express as much. So the reason why I worry in the first part about the viability is even if we get these good people, if they just then shoot off up the rest of the community, we're not going to be left with anyone to do the content we want to see, even if there were qualified people.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite theoretical things about management. I think it's called the Peter principle.
Yes, you're right. Yes.
Yeah. But I love the idea of it, and you can see it at work everywhere as well. You know, at any point, if you fail to get promoted, it's because you're at a lower level than you were in your previous job that was better suited for you, that would make the whole company or the infrastructure run better. I agree, but I also think there's a lot of people. There are a lot of people involved in. I'll speak for Over.gg because I was involved with, and still am involved with them. Still write for them occasionally. That there are a lot of people who are very excited to contribute in some way, and that basically makes the whole of the ticker system work, you know, how the matches are, they're recording stats and stuff like this, and there are people that write a lot of news and stuff, but they don't like to probe, they don't like the uncomfortable aspect of having to ask uncomfortable questions to people and follow kind of principles of journalism rather than just writing up stuff that requires less ethical practice in how you're actually doing it. Obviously, it's not unethical to write news, but you don't have to obey the same kind of principles as you're going through your work and really think about them, because it doesn't have the same potential for damage afterwards. But yeah, I think these people will kind of develop though, because there is a gap for it. There is a niche, and so the first person to fill it will have success and will continue doing it.
One of the reasons I think we are not seeing so much investigative stuff is because, at least for me, I'm not experienced. I haven't had education about how to do investigative stuff. So if I get a story to me, someone tells me something, I'm not sure how exactly to break it, not to hurt their chances, for example, for getting their money back or something like that.
Okay. I mean, I will say on that grounds, like actually that's another reason why people like me and Richard are the way we are, because like even though Richard actually does have a degree in journalism or something along those lines, like some of us, it's only the fact that we're this sort of person that has gotten us in this position, you know. Like someone who, if someone goes and does a full degree in journalism at like an American university, comes out with 120, 150K's worth of debt, they're probably not going to go, you know what, let me just grind Overwatch for 5 years and maybe I can get to like 20K a year. That would be the dream. They're probably going to go, I'll take any job at fucking, you know, like Dallas Morning Star or something as the coffee guy, rather than actually, I might be a lot better at this, but apply myself as a career in this sense. You know, a lot of people probably won't go on that front. Okay, then let me spin it another way then. What would be the way to encourage more of all of these types of journalism? Investigative journalism, obviously article writing, interviews. What would be the way, as people who've been in the scene, you've known other people around the scene, what would be a way to encourage it within Overwatch specifically? What would some ideas be, or what would make it more favorable for you? What would entice you to do it more?
Involvement of big organizations that actually give me some sort of financial backup if it was to go awry in some way.
No, I'll tell you one thing, as a very, very small aside, because actually a lot of people in the industry, like high up people like this show, believe it or not, it's one of the more popular shows with them. I'll say this right now, this might sound like a very small detail, but if you ever want to help a starting journalist out, and more importantly, actually make them biased towards your org, retweet their stuff on your team's account. Now, I agree it shouldn't make them biased, but at the very minimum, they're going to think more favorably of your org. It would actually even be a great cynical move for all you cynical bastards that I know own these teams, like money, want to control the media narrative. This is how it's done. You don't have to hire them. So that is a very, very small move that actually I'm amazed to this day people don't do. It's one of the reasons why any chance I get to, if I ever see any level of corruption, I fuck those orgs up, because they will retweet all day long. Like, you know, an article by Yahoo or something written about their team where it's like, he's a 19-year-old boy and he's making a living playing video games. But if I wrote like a profile of their best player, I won't get dick, you know. And in the past, yeah, I don't want to anger these people. I wouldn't say anything like that. Guess what? I got more Twitter followers than your team, motherfucker. So I'll straight run you up the flagpole, son. So anyway, sorry, I made that very personal again. Yiska, keep going.
Kind of lost the train of thought there, but
it was about big teams working with you could help you.
Not just big teams, but also, you know, news organizations or like platforms that actually pay full-time journalism. If I had, for instance, like an ESPN backup, or I don't know what, and that obviously is also a problem in the general esports industry about the profitability of that. Sure. But if someone was to have my back in that regard, so I don't have to literally fear for my livelihood when I want to break something, then that would probably help in that regard. Or the advice to just get also, invested into another game. As sad as it is, the best thing I can do in order to keep my content truthful is to investigate other games and give me a way out if something goes completely kaput, you know?
Yes.
So
I actually think, by the way, it sounds like kind of here's the problem with that move. It sounds like something you should only do once you've sort of cracked the first game, as it were. But actually, I think because it will increase your skill set, in a weird way, you probably actually will get less criticism because you're kind of making your mistakes across many games. I think doing 2 games, if you are interested in another one, you know, if you happen to be interested in League of Legends or CSGO as well, I think working on more than one game can actually help in many senses in that respect, actually. I think it's not a bad piece of advice, that, because basically what you're saying there is, if you want to do Overwatch, like, you might not be able to make a full-time living now, but maybe you could make a partial living on one game and then make a partial living on this game, add them both together, and somehow by committee, you've got a job or at least something, a hobby that's going very well. I think there's something to that.
Yeah, I think the people that I come across most often who want to contribute to the Overwatch scene in terms of content, a guy emailed me with an article that he'd written, a huge long article, and was like, can you give me a hand with this? I mean, I'm personally too busy to do that kind of thing, and reading through it, it's like there are issues that so there's a lot of people who are very happy to contribute, but don't actually have the writing skills to be at a level where somebody would publish their work, even though they may have the knowledge and have watched the matches and stuff. And so it doesn't work in the sense that you can just spring into it and release your pieces on Medium or whatever, because people they're not formatted correctly. They don't have a sense of the narrative running through them and stuff like this. So, and there's like spelling and grammar is all over the place. So for me, that indicates that if you have the written skills to be able to create a piece of work, and you can also, and you've watched Overwatch and can frame it in any sense, there is a big opening for you to write relatively popular pieces for websites who want more and more written content. This, I think, also applies to stuff like interviews. If you live in the Los Angeles area and can get to the arena, you have an unprecedented opportunity to interview players pretty much. I mean, I'm not going to say whenever, because obviously they've got stuff to do, but you have a very large access to all of the players in one population where you probably are never going to get that again. I mean, maybe you get that in season 2 if they take forever going to home and away games, or who knows, season 3, season 4. But in general, this is a large opportunity to do stuff like create interviews, which are incredibly popular, and people eat up player content all the time. Just in general, as long as you have the ability to craft content, you don't even really have to come up with the ideas as much. If that's what you find limiting, you can put another spin on tournaments. You can write things that are very formulaic about, like, here's a summary of this tournament, or the MVPs of this tournament, or this is how one team transitioned into another team and how this roster change affected it. Stuff that is that doesn't require unique original thought. It just kind of is. Yeah, it is the generic stuff. But if you have the English skills to be able to craft it properly, you can transition that into coming up with more original thought and still put out content that people will enjoy. I mean, they'll enjoy it as well because it'll go along with their popular opinion. But you can also do stuff like player interviews and things like this. Everyone's very approachable in Overwatch. It's very easy, actually, to do what I was talking about, surface level investigative journalism, where you're asking about roster changes or what was going on in this situation, or going in and doing an interview with someone. Players respond to interviews just immediately, and they're all in like 1 or 2 Discords, so you can get in touch with them immediately. It is actually a very easy scene, I think, to make content for. You just have to, the issue is getting traction once you've made the content, but there should never be a barrier, I think, in terms of actually creating it in the first place.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, as a little hint to anyone, like the first part of what you were describing there, someone who maybe actually has some good ideas, or they've got a level of expertise or a perspective, but they haven't cracked like the writing aspect, which is obviously a skill in itself, you know, that takes a lot of work. The person to contact isn't me or Sideshow, because like I'll go ahead and say, he said there, I haven't really got time to, like, we just won't read it. Like I can tell you right now, I have a folder for even people I like in esports called Esports to be read. And I don't get through all those pieces. I do my best, but you know what? When a piece is like 3 months old and I didn't get to it, I don't read it, even if it was by someone I really like. So if I'm not going to read his piece, I'm not going to read your email or Facebook message with a massive piece in that doesn't grab me from the first sentence. It's just not going to happen. The person you need to be sending that piece to is, as I mentioned earlier when I said it felt like everyone writes for EsportsHeaven, you want to get in contact with Drexen from EsportsHeaven, or someone who's an editor-in-chief who would love to get someone who's like untapped potential, that if they just help tweak some of their writing a bit, suddenly they've got a writer starting from the ground floor. They're probably not going to have to pay you very much. That's exactly the sort of guy that person's looking for, who doesn't have a massive budget to just hire all the big guys, you know. I'm sure, RadoN, you can probably talk to this, right? These are the sort of people you want to get in contact with.
Yeah, I basically started doing Apex daily reviews of what happened in each match, and I started posting them on Medium. And by the end of season 1, I started doing a bit of analysis, and that's when I basically contacted Drexen from EsportsHeaven, and he said, "Yeah, you can come along. I'll help you write and improve on certain stuff." And that's basically how I started. I started by posting on Medium. I was really terrible. Yep. So, yeah, you just start doing stuff, and eventually people, when you ask enough people, they'll answer you.
And actually, like Sideshow said, by the way, never be scared of generic stuff, because here's the funny thing about generic stuff. So many people want their article to be a magnum opus that makes some amazing point that, believe it or not, most of the generic stuff does not get done. Like even in massive games I can tell you about, there aren't that many articles like who was the MVP of this tournament or who is the best at each role. Like these very, very simple pieces that all of us could do. Most people maybe naively think, well, someone else will do that, so I'll just put more work into my big piece, you know. And actually, a lot of those bases don't get covered, and that's actually probably the ideal beginning content where you can't fuck up too much, you know. You're probably going to get roughly in the right area. Even better, when you post that, even if it's not mega well executed, the replies you do get, it's going to be sort of a read this while I'm drinking some coffee type article. People will probably even engage with it. Oh, I don't think this guy was the MVP. Did you forget about this guy? For you, where you're not going to get any comments on your first piece, that's a dream, actually. People will even engage with it, because I can tell you, forget about discouragement, like, you fucking suck, Harsha. It's the guy who posts it. It gets no upvotes, no comments, and he's just like, I die alone. Just like, that's the true discouraging aspect, right?
Yeah. I think as well, there are somebody that springs to mind when we talk about somebody that had good written things and was creating content just off on their own was Amelia Pash, who writes for Overwatch as well, who released a few pieces that had kind of generic topics or thought points, but they were really well constructed, and it was clear that she had a really good ability to write. And so immediately she stood out way more to me as somebody that I should help promote and possibly drag into Over.gg, where she now writes content for, rather than somebody that has interesting ideas but has never structured them in a way where I would read them or would want to promote them and yes, would think that they would be perfect for a site. It's
actually easier to come from the other side, right? Because the difference is you'll start reading the piece that's well written, and it'll take you halfway through before you realize, oh, they just know a bit, you know, they're not an expert or anything. But the difference is the guy with the amazing ideas who can't even hook you in, like he's written it in the wrong order and he hasn't led with the key part, you know, you'll never get to the part to know that it's good in a weird way.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing to note as well when we're talking about Overwatch content is that I feel like we have quite a lot of solidarity with each other, or we're quite happy just to hop in a Discord and chat about content or collaborate on stuff and try and big each other up, because there's some sense that everybody who's creating content is really quite small in the Overwatch scene, apart from some large giants that drag you onto panel shows and further their own YouTube accounts, but other than that, everyone's really quite small and trying to help each other. So if you show potential, you're probably going to get as much help as can reasonably be given by other small fries as well.
Let me just say one caveat to that, though. Again, he did just say earlier, don't email him. He's not going to reply with like a massive critique of your piece. Here's one very simple tip that I will give anyone who's watching who's thinking, actually, you know what? There's space in the community. I should come in. Here's the tip, okay? Don't ever send anyone anything that was the first 5 things you wrote, right? Imagine this analogy. You want to become a guitarist, right? You idolize Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, all these amazing guitarists. You would never have the gall to play your first song out of the book for learning the guitar and go up to someone who's a professional musician and go, what do you think of this? Because anyone with half a brain knows what fucking arrogance would you have to even waste that guy's time. You'd at least learn to play the guitar before you started doing it. You'd get some sort of either you'd have your own tune, that's a good one, or you'd get half competent, like, hey, this is your song, but look, I'm pretty good at it, right? You got to get some level of competence. So fail a few times first, then start asking for help. Because I also will say this, sometimes you also don't help people out, because it's like, I can't even help you tell you what you did wrong there, mate, because you did nothing right. Like, you have to sort of at least have the basics before I can give you a hint, I can't teach you from ground up how to do this, it's got to be a tweak I can give you, not lesson 1,
And just in general as well, I think that actually directly asking for help or not so much collaboration, but kind of advice and stuff like this, I find is less it works less well than just putting your pieces out there and waiting for others to interact with them. Yes. Because most of the time, people who create content are kind of looking for other people who create content anyway, rather than requiring you to approach them. So in most senses, the people who are higher up than you pick the correct times to get in touch with you, or the same downwards. It's like, I would rather pick the correct time to get in touch with somebody else rather than have people constantly ask me, because it might be that you get in touch with me about a piece that I don't really have that much much to talk about.
Yeah.
And I feel obliged to discuss it in some sense because I think you have some potential, whereas your piece before that or your piece after that or 3 after that would have been a much better point at which to get in touch with you and discuss like what you were doing within the scene. So I think in general, esports is a fairly open place for people to get started, and you probably are going to get noticed if you're pumping out content regularly or pumping out good content at a lower level because people are looking for it.
Yeah, I would say that what has always helped me, and naively at some point in my life I believed that all tribalism was just garbage and that people just cycle jerked and it would turn into an echo chamber. But the more I create content, I realize that if you keep yourself honest and your group or tribe honest and can have like meaningful discussions between them, that's like basically what's happened. You kind of almost need it psychologically because it does feel like that new game, that everyone's talking about. They are billions. Like you need to build your little fort. So all the Reddit plebs and like the even like the pro players are really just plebs who are better at clicking people's heads. Right?
There we go.
Like
That's the quote.
Right, like it can wreck you if you don't have anyone to fall back, and who also will give you very honest advice and will wreck your shit if something was, not done well or whatever. So like just creating your echo chamber obviously won't help you either, but just having, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be just journalists. We talked to Baroy, who's like a coder for Winston's lab. We talked to we have Eden, who's like a math wizard or whatever, like very different people that can sort of fertilize your thinking process and help you see things from different perspectives, and it will inevitably help your content.
Also, if you're brand new, you can get a lot of help from Reddit even. Basically, if this is your first written work, you just post it, and there are a lot of native speakers on Reddit, and you get a lot of feedback basically about grammar and stuff like that. But you need better formatting, or just simple advice that most people can get in school. But if you don't have education in English, for example, you won't have. It's not something you can get by.
Hey guys, it's Dreamforce here. They say that every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, God kills a kitten. Well, this is Thorin's channel, and every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, Thorin kills a seagull.